Okay, today we are going to talk to you about colonizing Mars. We're going to show evidence from the past and plans for the future. My name is Racine, and I am talking about the contemporary issue. First, present issue, why Mars and what's stopping us? The big idea is that scientists and politicians and just random people have this great idea that humans can inhabit the planet Mars and successfully maintain life there with the right tools. The idea is that when our Earth is no longer deemed livable, we'll be advanced enough to populate Mars and rebuild society. So what's wrong with Earth anyway? There's global warming and climate change, which is incredibly taking its toll. We obviously have to find an air source elsewhere when we considerably have no more of that. The living capacity is gradually declining as we continue to overpopulate ourselves. And aside from that, the idea CO2 emissions have increased substantially, and when you look at Earth in its current state, it's not going to be lasting us too much longer. This is considered a huge driving point for moving to Mars. So some common setbacks that we face are mainly economic roadblocks. Some people have an issue with spending billions of dollars on recolonizing when we can spend that money elsewhere and continue living out our days here on Earth. Many people don't like the idea of literally moving to a different planet because it's foreign to them. So in terms of political views and bias, many figures of power don't see the point in government funding a one-way trip to Mars. They can spend their money on other things. What other people are saying is that it would mark the beginning of extraterrestrial living for human beings, which is incredibly substantial in scientific terms. Running in fast movements would probably take quite a bit of relearning, but it is better than moving around on the moon. So, say we did have to leave our Earth and people don't want to go to Mars, where else would they go besides the moon or Venus or anywhere else, which would not necessarily work out for anyone. Setbacks continued. There's clearly some atmospherical differences, such as levels of gravity. The amount of radiation that we face on Mars is twice as much as we would face on Earth. So we would be facing the possibility or the issue of living the first 100,000 something years on Mars in spacesuits, and we would be decreasing bone density with each coming year. More atmospherical differences. Obviously, there's water, but we have to obtain it somehow. And breathing, we can't 100% walk, talk, and breathe the same way we do on Earth. So we would have to figure that out as well. Mars versus Earth, there are relatively similar atmospheres. CO2 levels are somewhere on the same page. Temperatures on Mars are substantially higher or lower than they are on Earth. So we have to face that, and then obviously gravity again. So say we did decide to give it a shot and inhabit Mars. Life on our first couple decades or so of life on Mars, we would basically be living in little Terra bubbles while adjusting to a different atmosphere. Going outside of the little capsules that we create to live in, we would have to have spacesuits on and all the right tools and equipment to actually have a livable environment, so that is always a huge factor to consider. In the meantime, say our world is ending and we have to find a new place to live. Some people are ready to move to Mars tomorrow, while other people are still trying to grasp onto the idea of moving planets, quite literally. Scientists are diligently trying to figure out ways to make Mars habitable within the next decade or two. Ultimately, what happens to our Earth matters. Living on Mars could very well possibly happen, so we might as well do our research and get educated about our options as for what is to come next.
Alright, so my name's Ethan. I'm going to talk to you guys about the historical context of colonizing Mars, which obviously has not happened yet. So the idea of colonizing another planet is not a new idea, but with new technology and increasing issues with world population and doubts about the long-term sustainability of humankind, this idea has moved to the forefront of many conversations. One of the most discussed planets for this potential endeavor is Mars. There is no history of humans colonizing Mars, though, because it has not yet been done. Having said that, though, there is historical context of groups colonizing areas on different places on Earth for the reasons of resources, scientific advancement, and long-term viability of the human race. If we ever do colonize Mars, we can learn much from past colonizations of areas on Earth, so we can do it both ethically and scientifically to continue the existence of mankind. There are three main aspects I'm going to talk to you guys about colonizing Mars. So the first one is extreme environments on Earth, which humans have adapted to when necessary. It has only happened recently, but there is a history of humans colonizing very inhospitable regions. One example of this is we have a small but permanent population living in Antarctica that is there for scientific studies. Some of these studies have helped support the idea of global warming, which helps support the reasoning behind why we need to go to Mars in the first place. Also, studying volcanoes can give a general idea of the Earth's stability, and some of the suits that we use would be similar potentially to some of the suits used to navigate on Mars. So in the very recent history, countries have come together to learn how to adapt to living in space and traveling through space. Our time on the International Space Station will be very crucial in trying to live on Mars. Also, the small amount of time that we have spent on the moon has helped our astronauts and scientists learn how to operate when there is less gravity, and it is a good testing ground for their suits. For over 15 years, there's been uninterrupted human habitation of the International Space Station since November 2nd, 2000. There's been a rotating crew who typically stay for about 6 months, so there are already quite a few people who are well adapted to operating in altered gravity. Also, the suit similarities themselves between the Mars prototype suit and the current astronaut suits are very similar, so we could be able to travel Mars with very little modification. So humans have been colonizing different parts of the world, both uninhabited and already populated for a very long time. If we learn the ethical lessons from much of Europe's colonization, we can colonize the correct way to not destroy the native environment and native population if there is one. There has been no indication of intelligent life on Mars, or life at all, but the recent discovery of water may have changed our conclusion on that. Regardless of the presence or not of life on Mars when we get there, it is our duty to not destroy or modify more than we need to make room for mankind there. Throughout history, there has been examples of human colonizing areas with cruelty, which a good example of that is basically any European colonization of the majority of the rest of the planet. But there's also good examples of colonization when done on Earth, which would be an example of this would be Antarctica, where we have not really disturbed the natural wildlife, and we've still done the research that we'd like to. So, in conclusion, it's a very important issue for the human population to survive colonization on Mars. We basically need to do it. But if we don't learn from the past, then it could be as disastrous as the Columbian Exchange. We can look to history to do this correctly and ethically, to be able to colonize correctly, and lessons that we have learned from our time on the moon and from our time on the International Space Station can help us learn when we finally do get to Mars. Now Dan's going to talk to you guys about the future.
Awesome, thanks Ethan. So let's decide that as a society, we do want to become an interplanetary species. So what is that going to look like in the future, and can we justify it? So some of the world's most innovative entrepreneurs all have plans to go to Mars. NASA has plans to go to Mars. Given the amount of intellectual and physical capital that we could dedicate to this project, it seems likely that a manned mission and eventual colonization will likely happen. So why Mars? The idea, at least put forth by Elon Musk, is that we should diversify as a species, that there have been extinction events that have happened on Earth before, like with the dinosaurs. So it might be smart for us to be on more than just Earth. It's also the closest planet, so it's the shortest amount of time to get there, and it's the most studied through our Mars rover programs and other space programs that we've done. We've been able to get a lot of information about Mars, and we have a pretty good idea about what it's going to look like when we get there. So is this colonization justifiable? So we have plenty of issues here to take care of, not a whole lot of resources, a planet that's kind of getting sick because of climate change and things like that. So is it justifiable? Given like what I was just talking about a second ago with other extinction events. It may not be climate change that is the eventual thing that we really have to worry about. And I think there's room for spending on both Mars colonization and enough to go around to fix the issues that we have here. There is the potential and the worry that this will be something that's elitist, that only the people that can afford it will be able to escape this dying planet. But I think it's still justifiable as a means of preserving our species, and just because there's other issues besides climate change that may also warrant colonizing Mars. So how do we get there? NASA has a plan that's called the Journey to Mars. They're planning on having 6 humans in Mars in the 2030s. They're using the Orion spacecraft, which they've already built, but they just need to modify that and modify the landing and all of that kind of thing in order to be able to fit more people and more resources. They're building this thing that's called the Space Launch System, or the SLS, which is able to carry more people and more cargo to make this journey to Mars actually possible. Obviously, 6 people isn't a whole lot if you're talking about colonizing another planet, but it is a step in the right direction. There's also the Mars 1 mission. They have a much more longer-term plan to establish a physical colony. They're also building their own spacecraft. It's called the Mars Transit Vehicle. There's a picture of it on this slide. And the idea is to get actually a society built there in a more meaningful capacity, more than just the 6 people that NASA wants to put out. So how do we make Mars livable? The Mars 1 plan outlines kind of a shorter-term, immediate fix and a longer-term plan. They have these living units designed that are airlocked, so astronauts can live fairly comfortably outside of their suits, and they'll be sending rockets with their immediate supplies for food, water, everything they would need to get by for quite some time. The longer term, they have these greenhouses that they're planning to build. They'll have big windows so we can cultivate food just like we would here on Earth and become more self-sustaining, not dependent on Earth, but still there will be additional supply deliveries with additional food, building supplies, water, and all of that. So there's also this plan that Elon Musk has talked about called terraforming. We know that there's a whole lot of ice and CO2 that's frozen at the north and south poles of Mars, and his plan involves actually nuking those poles, which sounds kind of insane, but there's actually some science behind it. The idea is if we can vaporize the CO2 and the water and the ice, that will create an atmosphere similar to what we have on Earth, create a greenhouse that will kind of tame out the temperature swings that Mars currently has, and hopefully make more of a breathable atmosphere that we would eventually be able to survive in. So in conclusion, Earth does have serious issues. Climate change is changing our planet. We have a hugely growing population, which may not be sustainable in the long term, given our fixed amount of resources. Humans also have set the precedent of exploring new frontiers and colonizing new inhospitable environments, which makes not really much of a stretch to go to another planet. That's just the next frontier for us as a society. And we have the technology and the drive to establish a colony on Mars. Really, the question at this point is just when that will happen. So thank you.